What could make a man who spent 8 years running from love stand perfectly still when a stranger quietly rested her head on his shoulder? The river roared so loudly Dawson barely heard her cry. A rope snapped tight across the current. Cold water slammed against his legs as muddy waves pulled at the horses. And then, through the storm, she reached for him instead of letting go. Why would a woman who barely knew him trust him with her life? Tell us where you're watching from as the story begins. The summer of 1875 settled gently over Silver Crossing, though nothing about the sky promised an easy season. Long ribbons of cloud drifted above the Silver Range, their undersides dark enough to make old ranchers glance toward the mountains before finishing their coffee. Along Main Street, wagon wheels rolled through dry dust while the smell of leather, fresh-cut pine, and horse sweat lingered in the evening air. Dawson Clay rode into town without slowing his black stallion until the hitching rail outside the Dusty Trail Saloon came into view. Thunder lowered his head as Dawson loosened the reins. The cowboy rubbed the horse's neck once before lifting his saddlebag onto one shoulder. He carried only what he could ride away with: one bedroll, one spare shirt, a coffee tin, a worn Bible tucked inside the flap. Nothing suggested a man expecting tomorrow to look different from yesterday. Inside the saloon, laughter drifted from a card table near the window. Someone played a slow tune on an old fiddle, though no one seemed to be listening anymore. Dawson chose the table farthest from the room. His chair faced both the door and the windows. Came Sullivan polished a glass behind the bar before walking over. "The usual?" Dawson nodded once. "One whiskey. Nothing more." He lifted the glass, but waited before drinking. Outside, thunder shifted his weight, ears turning toward the distant hills. Sheriff Amos Turner stepped through the swinging doors moments later. His boots carried a trail of fresh mud that did not belong in a town where the streets were still dry. "Evening, Clay," Dawson answered with a quiet nod. Amos sat without asking permission. From inside his coat, he removed a sealed envelope and placed it beside the whiskey. "Bank convoy leaves at first light." Dawson did not touch the paper. "I've quit escort work." "This isn't ordinary escort work." Amos glanced toward the western window, where the mountains disappeared beneath thickening clouds. "Silver River's rising. Folks up north wired before the telegraph went quiet. Rain's coming hard through the passes." Dawson finally looked at him. "They need somebody who knows the lower crossings. They need somebody who reads weather better than maps." Silence settled between them. "The job pays $20, Amos continued. 4 days if everything goes right." 4 days. Long enough to earn money, short enough to avoid knowing anyone. Dawson lifted the envelope. "I leave when it's done." "I figured you would." Amos almost smiled before his expression faded. "There was a time somebody waited for you to come home." The words hung in the room. Dawson's fingers tightened around the envelope. "Not anymore." The sheriff did not apologize. Neither man mentioned it again. Outside, twilight settled across the street. Dawson declined Sullivan's offer of a room above the saloon. "I'll sleep beside my horse." "You always do. It's quieter." When dawn arrived, Silver Crossing stirred beneath a pale sky streaked with heavy gray clouds. The bank wagon stood outside the marshal's office. Its iron-bound payroll chest had already been chained beneath the rear bench. Martin Brennan checked documents one final time while Eli Mercer tightened the harness on the lead team. A young guard frowned as another passenger climbed aboard. She carried a leather journal polished smooth by years of careful hands. A brass ruler rested inside the pocket of her satchel, beside folded letters sealed with St. Louis wax. Martin Brennan straightened his vest. "Mr. Clay, allow me to introduce Miss Talia Reed. She'll oversee the accounts for the new Willow Creek branch." Talia stepped down from the wagon instead of waiting to be greeted. She extended her hand first. "A pleasure, Mr. Clay." Dawson removed his hat. "Morning, ma'am." Her handshake was steady, practical, not timid. One of the guards leaned toward Brennan. speaking quietly enough that he probably believed she could not hear. "You sure she ought to ride with the payroll chest?" Talia closed her journal without looking offended. "Mr. Brennan," he turned. "Would you remind me of the amount inside the locked chest?" He answered quickly. 9,200. She shook her head gently. $9,463. She paused. "You forgot the mining payroll added yesterday afternoon." Brennan blinked. After a moment he smiled. "You're right." The guard looked away without another word. Talia crossed to the wagon herself. Without asking anyone for help, she slid the heavy payroll chest farther beneath the bench until its weight balanced evenly over the axle. Then she locked it again. The small brass key disappeared beneath a ribbon around her neck. Dawson watched every movement. She had not argued. She had not defended herself. She had simply been right. Martin handed her the freight manifest. Within seconds, she pointed toward the final page. "These crate numbers are reversed." He checked. Again, she was correct. By mid-morning, the convoy rolled westward. Thunder carried Dawson ahead of the wagon, while Eli guided the team over the winding road toward the Silver Range. Behind them, Silver Crossing slowly disappeared beneath drifting dust. For several quiet hours, only the sounds of leather creaking, horses breathing, and wheels turning filled the road. Through the wagon window, Talia unfolded her map. Every few miles she made neat pencil notes beside creek crossings, ridge lines, and distances between camps. Late that afternoon, they stopped beside a cottonwood grove, where fresh water flowed across flat stones. Dawson checked Thunder's shoes before tightening the saddle cinch. He sensed someone standing nearby before hearing her voice. "Do you always ride alone?" He kept working. "Easier that way." A breeze stirred the tall grass between them. Talia looked toward the dark clouds gathering beyond the mountains. Easier isn't always the same as better. Dawson did not answer. For reasons he could not explain, the simple sentence lingered longer than it should have. When camp broke an hour later, Dawson mounted again. As Thunder climbed the next rise, he noticed fresh tracks crossing the road. One horseshoe carried a broken nail at the heel. He reined in. The print was new, no more than an hour old. Slowly he looked back toward the ridge beyond the trees. No rider remained there now. Only the wind moved through the grass. But Dawson knew one thing with quiet certainty. Someone else was traveling the same road, and they were not far behind. Dawson studied the horseshoe print only a moment longer before nudging Thunder forward. He said nothing to the others. A trail could tell the truth long before a frightened traveler did. And until he knew what the track meant, there was no sense spreading worry through the convoy. The morning passed beneath a ceiling of low clouds. The farther they rode from Silver Crossing, the heavier the air became. Wildflowers still bloomed beside the trail, but their bright colors looked muted beneath the gathering storm. Every so often, Thunder lifted his head and sniffed the wind. Dawson trusted the horse almost as much as he trusted the sky. By late morning, the narrow road curved beneath a steep hillside where runoff trickled across the wagon ruts. Eli Mercer frowned from the driver's seat. "Ground's softer than yesterday." "It'll hold," Brennan answered from inside the wagon. Dawson looked once toward the slope above them. "No," he said quietly. "It won't." Almost as the words left his mouth, a deep groan echoed beneath the wagon. The right front wheel dropped suddenly into wet earth. The horses lurched. "Hold them!" Eli shouted. Mud splashed high against the spokes as the axle twisted under the weight of the payroll chest. Dawson swung down from Thunder before the wagon stopped moving. His boots sank halfway to the ankle as he knelt beside the wheel. Water seeped beneath the roadbed. The hillside had become the shallow wash hidden beneath loose dirt. "Nobody climbs down," he called. "Let's wait." The guards stayed where they were. Brennan leaned toward the doorway. Can you lift it?" "I can try." Dawson shoved a timber beneath the axle and strained against the wheel. Muscles tightened across his shoulders, but the wagon barely moved. Inside, Talia watched the axle bend another fraction. Without asking permission, she pushed open the wagon door. Her boots landed in thick mud. Dawson looked up sharply. "Miss Reed." She ignored the warning and crouched beside the wheel. Her dark traveling dress disappeared beneath streaks of brown clay. "You'll ruin your clothes," Dawson said. She glanced toward the payroll chest. "A dress can be washed. A payroll chest at the bottom of a ravine cannot." Instead of grabbing the wheel, she looked inside the wagon. "The ledger case." Brennan blinked. "What about it?" "It's sitting on the same side as the payroll chest." She pointed calmly. "Move it across." The older banker hesitated only a second before obeying. The guards shifted the heavy leather case to the opposite bench. The wagon settled slightly. Dawson noticed immediately. He met Talia's eyes. "Good catch." She smiled only enough for him to notice. "Now push." He braced himself against the timber. She planted both hands beside his. Together they forced upward. The wheel lifted. Mud released it with a loud sucking sound. The wagon rolled free onto firmer ground. Dawson stumbled backward as the weight suddenly disappeared. Before he could regain his balance, Talia caught his forearm. For one quiet heartbeat, neither moved. Mud covered both their sleeves. Rain began falling in slow, scattered drops. "You all right?" she asked. He nodded. "So are you." Brennan climbed down at last. "The records?" Talia let go of Dawson's arm. "Dry." The moment disappeared as naturally as it had begun. They continued west. Rain settled into a steady curtain before noon. The road narrowed through cottonwoods until the Silver River came into view. No one spoke. The bridge spoke for itself. Half the structure had vanished downstream. Broken timbers jutted above the rushing water like snapped ribs. Eli removed his hat. "Lord have mercy," Brennan sighed. "We wait." Dawson studied the current. "If more rain's falling upriver, waiting could leave us here all week." Silence followed. Then Talia opened her satchel. She unfolded an older survey map across the wagon seat. "This bridge wasn't here when this was drawn." Her finger followed faded pencil lines. "There." She tapped a narrow bend south of the crossing. "A livestock ford." Eli leaned closer. "I haven't seen that crossing in years." Dawson looked from the map toward the trees. "I'll check it." Less than half an hour later he returned, soaked to the knees. "It'll carry us." The river still surged, but broad gravel beneath the surface offered steady footing. He tied a thick rope around an old cottonwood on the near bank. One guard carried the far end across. The current fought every step. When the rope tightened between the two trees, Dawson nodded. "Bring the wagon." Talia mounted a gray mare instead of riding inside. "The wagon's heavy enough." Rain blurred the far bank. Halfway through the crossing, floating branches swept around the horse's legs. The gray mare shied sideways. "Talia!" Eli shouted. The horse reared. Dawson caught the bridle just as another branch slammed into his left leg. Pain shot upward. His boot slipped on the hidden stones. For one terrifying second, the river claimed his footing. Then another hand caught the back of his coat. Talia wrapped one arm around the guide rope while holding him with the other. "Don't let go," she said. "I wasn't planning to." He steadied himself, turned against the current, and shielded both horses until they reached the shallows. Rain streamed from the brim of his hat. Water dripped from Talia's curls. They stood breathing hard without speaking. Only after everyone reached the far bank did Dawson notice something strange. A short section of the guide rope hung loose. Its fibers had not snapped. They had been cut. He quietly untied the damaged length before Brennan noticed. Later, while the others adjusted harnesses, he handed it to Eli. "Look close." The older driver ran rough fingers across the clean ends. "Knife," Dawson nodded. "I think our rider caught up." Eli looked toward the ridge above the river. "I thought I saw somebody watching us." Neither man said another word. By evening, the rain had turned cold. High on Clearwater Ridge, an abandoned prospector's cabin emerged through the trees. Its roof sagged. One shutter hung crooked, but smoke could still rise through the stone chimney. And tonight, that was enough. Dawson pushed the cabin door inward with his shoulder. Damp pine and old ashes met them in the dark. One corner of the roof had given way, but the stone hearth remained sound, and several split logs lay beneath a canvas sheet near the wall. Eli led the horses beneath the lean-to. The guards settled near the payroll chest, while Brennan spread his coat beside it, as though the iron box might grow legs during the night. Dawson struck flint over dry bark. The first spark died, the second caught. Soon a small fire began licking around the wood, throwing weak gold across the rough walls. Talia removed her soaked gloves. Her fingers trembled as she held them toward the heat. Dawson noticed, shrugged off his coat, and laid it around her shoulders. "You need it more than I do," she said. That wasn't a question. She gave him a tired look, but kept the coat. When Dawson sat near the hearth, pain tightened through his left leg. He rolled up the wet cloth enough to inspect the place where the branch had struck him. Blood had dried along the edge of an older scar. Talia crossed the room, carrying a clean strip torn from the lining of her travel bag. "Let me see." "It's nothing." She set the cloth beside him instead of arguing. "Then it should be easy to tend." He looked at her. She had already returned to the fire. That small restraint stayed with him. She had offered help without making him feel helpless. Rain hammered the roof until conversation became difficult. Brennan fell asleep beside the chest. One guard snored near the door. Eli remained beneath the lean-to, close to the team. Talia turned her mother's brass bracelet slowly around her wrist. "My mother liked storms," she said. Dawson stared into the fire. "Mine didn't." "What about you?" "I remember too much when it rains." She nodded, as if that answer required no explanation. "My mother used to say rain shows which roofs were built honestly. A fine roof and a poor one look much the same in dry weather." Wind pressed through a crack in the wall and bent the flame sideways. Dawson looked toward the damaged roof. Seems she was right. She usually was. Talia's voice softened. She also said not to let cruel people decide what kind of person you become. Otherwise, they take more than they were ever given. For a while, only the fire spoke. Talia's breathing slowed. Exhaustion pulled at her until her head tipped once, then settled against Dawson's shoulder. His whole body went still. The weight was almost nothing. Yet it carried him 8 years backward, to the last evening Sarah had leaned against him before he rode for the lumber camp. She had been tired then, one hand resting over the child they were waiting to meet. Dawson nearly moved, then Talia's fingers closed around the edge of his sleeve. Outside, thunder rolled over Clearwater Ridge. He drew the blanket from his bedroll and spread it across them both. "Sleep easy," he whispered. "Nothing out there but rain." He remained awake until the fire became red coals. Before sunrise, Dawson eased away without waking her and stepped outside. Mist lay thick among the trees. Water dripped from the roof in a steady rhythm. Near the rear wall, less than 20 yards from where Talia had slept, he found a hoofprint pressed deep into the mud, broken nail at the heel. The rider had stood there during the night, watching. Dawson followed the tracks to the ridge, but they disappeared where rain had washed the ground clean. By mid-morning, the convoy reached Clearwater Junction. The relay station was little more than a stable, a storeroom, and a one-room office joined beneath a weathered roof. The telegraph wire sagged from one pole, snapped loose by the storm. "No messages going out," the station keeper said. "Not until a lineman comes through." His expression changed when he saw the bank seals on Brennan's cases. Dawson noticed a coffee cup on the back step, still damp inside. "Who left?" The keeper glanced toward the northern road. "Stranger. Rode out before dawn. What kind of horse? Bay. Split ear. Dawson looked toward Eli. Neither man needed to speak. Brennan took the office with the payroll chest. Eli and the guards climbed into the hayloft. Only one guest room remained. Dawson set his bedroll near the stable door. Talia stood in the hallway with her ledger case. The room has a chair. I've slept in worse places. So have I. She opened the door. And it has a lock. Dawson hesitated. Then he carried the ledger case inside. The room held one narrow bed, one wooden chair, and a square table scarred by years of hot coffee cups. Dawson placed his gun belt on the floor beside the chair and sat facing the door. Talia lit the lamp. She opened the ledgers one at a time, using her father's brass ruler to hold each page flat. For nearly an hour, the only sounds were turning paper and rain tapping the window. Then her pencil stopped. She compared one receipt with another. Mr. Brennan. He appeared in the doorway. These freight charges were paid twice. He leaned closer. Talia turned another page. And these cattle loans belong to men who do not exist. Brennan's face tightened. She drew the ledger nearer. Payroll deductions had been marked as river losses. $380 had vanished between St. Louis and Willow Creek. The signatures beneath the entries looked different at first glance, but the pressure marks repeated in exactly the same places. Talia circled two initials. VP Dawson watched her expression change. Not fear, recognition. Vernon Pike, Brennan said quietly, one of the Willow Creek investors. Talia laid two receipts side by side. My father taught me copied writing hesitates in the same places. Mr. Pike may have changed the names, but he did not change his hand. Dawson looked toward the dark window, the cut rope, the sabotaged trail, the rider outside the cabin. They're not following the money, he said. Talia closed her fingers around the ledger. They're following this. The room seemed smaller after she spoke. Rain tapped softly against the window, but the silence inside carried more weight than the storm outside. Martin Brennan lowered himself onto the edge of the chair. For the first time since leaving Silver Crossing, the confidence of a bank representative disappeared from his face. There has to be another explanation. Talia turned the ledger toward him. If there is, I'll gladly accept it. She placed 3 receipts side by side. The freight charges are identical. Same route, same wagon number, same amount. She slid another page forward. These cattle loans belong to men who were never issued grazing permits. Her pencil stopped on the final entry. And every missing dollar eventually points back to Vernon Pike. Brennan rubbed his forehead. I've reviewed these books twice. You reviewed the arithmetic. She spoke gently, never raising her voice. I reviewed the people. Dawson watched her more closely than the pages. There was no satisfaction in proving someone wrong, only determination. He understood that kind of determination. It belonged to people who had spent too many years needing to be right before anyone would believe them. Outside, thunder stamped once beneath the stable roof. Dawson stood. I'll check the horses. No one stopped him. Rain had slowed to a fine mist. The yard behind the relay station lay empty, except for wagon tracks filling slowly with water. He walked toward Thunder, running one hand along the stallion's neck. The horse flicked an ear toward the northern trail. Again, someone had been there. Not now, recently. Dawson followed the direction of Thunder's gaze until it disappeared into gray timber. His instincts whispered the same warning they had carried since the broken horseshoe print. Keep moving. Don't stop too long. When he returned, Talia had stacked every receipt into careful piles. She looked tired, the kind of tired that came from carrying responsibility instead of miles. Brennan finally sighed. If Pike truly altered these accounts, he'll deny everything. He may. Talia closed her journal, but numbers remember longer than people do. Night settled quietly around Clearwater Junction. The station keeper apologized for having only one guest room. "I can make space in the stable," Dawson offered. Talia shook her head. "The room has a chair. It isn't proper. The door locks." She met his eyes without embarrassment. "And I trust you." The words reached him before he could prepare for them. Trust. He had spent years making certain no one expected it from him. Now someone offered it freely. Inside the room, Dawson laid his gun belt beside the chair before sitting down. Talia claimed the far side of the table. Neither crossed the invisible space between them. The lamp burned low while rain whispered outside. For a long time, only pages turned. Then Talia closed the final ledger. "My father owned a small supply shop." Dawson looked up. "I learned numbers behind his counter." She smiled faintly. "Customers accepted my calculations." The smile faded. "They just didn't always accept me." She traced one finger across the worn edge of her journal. "When this appointment came, Father told me one thing." She looked toward the lamp. "Do your work so well, they have to argue with the truth instead of you." Dawson nodded slowly. He sounds wise. He usually was. Silence settled again. Then she asked quietly, "What about you?" He stared at his hands. For years he had answered that question with a shrug. Tonight felt different. "I had a wife." The words came slowly. "Sarah." He swallowed. "We were expecting our first child." Rain tapped against the glass. "I left for a lumber camp before winter." His voice roughened. "Needed money." He looked toward the floor. "Fever reached home before I did." The room seemed almost too still to breathe. "When I rode back," he stopped. There were 2 graves beneath an oak tree. Nothing moved except the lamp flame. "I never unpacked again." Talia did not offer comfort. She did not say she understood. Instead, she simply listened. Sometimes that was kinder. After a while, she reached across the table. Her hand rested lightly over his. Dawson stared at it. Then, almost without thinking, he turned his palm upward beneath hers. Neither spoke. The distance between them became no wider than a breath. He found himself looking into her eyes instead of the grief they carried. Slowly, carefully, they leaned closer. Not because the storm had trapped them, not because loneliness demanded it, because the quiet between them had begun to feel like home. Just before their foreheads touched, Talia whispered, "When the bank doors open." She hesitated. "Where will you go?" The question stopped everything. Dawson looked away first. West. The single word settled heavily between them. Most likely. Her hand slipped gently from his. She nodded once. No accusation, no anger, only acceptance that somehow hurt more than either. She reopened the ledger. The scratching of her pencil filled the room. It sounded louder than thunder. Morning arrived beneath a sky washed pale by the night's rain. The convoy prepared to leave. Dawson inspected every wheel before sunrise. The wagon looked sound. Too sound. His fingers paused on the front axle. Something felt wrong, but wet wood hid what darkness had concealed. The descent toward Willow Creek began just after breakfast. Mist clung to the hillsides. The road curved above a narrow gorge. Without warning, crack! The retaining pin snapped. The front axle lurched sideways. The wagon tilted violently toward open air. "Jump!" Dawson shouted. The guards leaped clear. Brennan stumbled from the rear. Inside, the payroll chest held fast beneath its chains. Talia reached for the ledger case. The wagon shifted again. Dawson climbed onto the leaning step and caught her around the waist just as the wagon rolled. They hit the ground together. His shoulder slammed against a buried rock. Pain shot through his left side. The leather ledger case burst open. Loose pages lifted into the wind. No! Talia scrambled toward them. The slope beneath her boots began to crumble. Damn it, Talia! She ignored him. One receipt, then another, then another. A final page skipped toward the edge. Dawson wrapped a rope around his good arm, anchored himself against a pine stump, and reached. Their fingers caught the same page at the same instant. He pulled. The earth collapsed where she had been kneeling only a heartbeat before. Both of them fell backward into the wet grass, breathing hard, alive. Eli picked up the broken retaining pin. His weathered face hardened. This wasn't weather. He held it toward Dawson. Fresh saw marks crossed the metal. Caught beneath the grease clung one strand of dark red horsehair. Dawson closed his hand around it. He already knew which horse it belonged to. When they reached the final ridge overlooking Willow Creek, everyone stopped without speaking. Thin gray smoke drifted upward from the new bank. Eli frowned. The furnaces weren't supposed to be lit until tomorrow. Dawson's eyes narrowed. Someone had arrived before them, and whoever it was already knew they were coming. Willow Creek lay below them in the late afternoon light, young and unfinished, with raw boardwalks, fresh-cut storefronts, and the red brick bank standing at the center of Main Street. Smoke curled from its chimney. Men moved around the front steps as though they had been waiting all day. Vernon Pike stood among them. He wore a dark coat, despite the warm air, and held a silver-headed cane he did not need. Two riders waited behind him. One sat a split-eared bay horse. Dawson saw the animal and felt his jaw tighten. Pike stepped forward as the damaged wagon rolled to a stop. "Mr. Brennan, you are late." Brennan climbed down slowly. "We lost the bridge, and nearly the wagon from the look of it." Pike's gaze moved to Talia, then to the mud-stained ledger case in her arms. "Those records were opened before delivery?" "They were reviewed," Talia said. "By whose authority?" "Mine." A few men shifted on the boardwalk. Pike smiled without warmth. "I think the investors would prefer a qualified local clerk to examine them." Talia placed one hand over the case. "The investors hired me to organize the branch accounts. They hired Mr. Brennan." Brennan cleared his throat. "Miss Reed was appointed in St. Louis." Pike's smile faded. He began asking questions in the careful tone of a man building suspicion one brick at a time. Why had the convoy arrived late? Why was the axle broken? Why had Talia shared shelter with a hired escort? Why were pages missing from their order? Talia answered each one. When Pike demanded the books be sealed, she refused. Brennan looked from Pike to the gathering investors. 3 days, he said at last. Miss Reed will complete the audit before the bank opening. If the figures do not support her claims, the records will be turned over. Pike touched 2 fingers to the brim of his hat. Then we will all have our answer. At the livery, a cattle buyer repeated one of the rumors already moving through town. Dawson stepped between him and Talia, one hand near his holster. Miss Reed speaks for herself, he said. You will give her the same respect you give the money she carried here. The man backed away. Later, Talia found Dawson beside Thunder. I will not live behind your gun, she said. Dawson studied the ground. Then tell me where to stand. Beside me, not in front. For 3 nights, she worked beneath the bank lamps. Receipts covered the long oak counter. Freight slips, payroll lists, cattle brands, loan dates. Widow Martha Cooper brought coffee in a blue enamel pot and left without questions. Eli Mercer supplied the names of ranch hands whose wages had vanished. A young teller admitted Pike often collected sealed envelopes before Brennan arrived. Dawson's shoulder worsened. Talia came to his room at the boarding house with boiled water, liniment, and clean linen. His saddlebags stood packed beside the bed. She helped him remove his coat. His breath caught when the hot cloth touched the bruise. Where will you go? She asked. Not decided. Her eyes moved to the bags. That is not true. He stared toward the window. Every time I picture staying, I see what it looked like when I came home too late. Talia tied that bandage carefully. Then you are not running from death. You are letting it decide the rest of your life. You expect me to become another man overnight? No. She gathered the cloths. I expect you to choose what kind of man you are before you ride away. Before dawn, Dawson saddled Thunder. He passed the bank while one lamp still burned inside. Talia stood over the ledger, her mother's bracelet beside the open pages. Their eyes met through the glass. Neither raised a hand. Dawson rode west. At sunrise, a carriage arrived from St. Louis. Edward Reed stepped down carrying an old contract and a sealed letter. The contract bore Vernon Pike's genuine signature. The letter offered Talia a safer, better-paid position back east. Do not stay for a man, Edward told her. Do not leave because of one either. By noon, Main Street was crowded for the bank opening. Pike arrived with his riders and a committee notice claiming Talia had been suspended. She stood on the bank steps with the ledger in her hands. Then she began reading. Names, amounts. Ranch hands shorted 2 weeks' pay. Widows charged interest on loans they never received. Cattle deliveries entered twice. Freight losses that had never occurred. Murmurs moved through the crowd. Pike ordered his men to take the books. One rider stepped forward. Then hoofbeats struck the far end of Main Street. Dawson rode in beside Eli Mercer. Caleb Voss sat bound on a spare horse behind them. A small saw, a damaged axle pin, and Pike's written order hung from Eli's saddle. Dawson had reached the Western Fork, seen the Broken Heel track turn north, and followed it into Dry Creek Canyon. Voss confessed before the whole town. Pike reached for his revolver. Dawson drew first. Put it in the dust! This time Pike obeyed. After the deputy took him away, Brennan began thanking Dawson. Dawson shook his head. The trail brought the books here. Miss Reed found what was inside them. He stepped aside. Talia demanded full authority over the branch accounts, equal pay, repayment of missing wages, and no investor access without her signature. Brennan agreed in writing. That evening, lanterns glowed inside the town hall. Talia wore a green dress. Dawson entered without his gun belt, saddlebags, or traveling coat. Never learned much dancing, he said. She offered her hand. Then stopped trying to lead every step. They moved awkwardly at first. Then the fiddle softened, and they found the rhythm. Talia rested her head on his shoulder. This time Dawson did not stiffen. He lowered his cheek against her hair while the town watched. Months later, at the Silver River Ford, he offered her a plain iron ring. I cannot promise the river will stay low, he said. I can promise I will not leave you standing on the bank alone. She accepted on one condition. The farm deed would carry both names. He smiled. It already does. Years later, rain approached their modest farm outside Willow Creek. Their son stood in the wheat with a paper kite while Dawson repaired a harness on the porch, and Talia closed the bank ledger on her lap. The boy looked toward the dark clouds. Should we be afraid? Talia rested her head on Dawson's shoulder. He listened as the first drops struck the roof. No, he said. We just make sure the roof is sound, and everyone we love is inside. No one ran. The rain came down across the wheat, soft at first, then steady enough to blur the far hills. Talia stayed beside Dawson on the porch, while their son hurried in with his kite tucked beneath one arm. Behind them, the farmhouse door stood open, spilling warm lamplight across the boards. Maybe that is what home truly is. Not a place where storms never come, but a place where people stop leaving when they do. Imagine carrying Dawson's grief for 8 years, believing that loving someone again would only give sorrow another name. Or imagine standing where Talia stood, asked to prove your worth again and again, yet refusing to let hardship make your heart smaller. Their lives did not become easy. The river still rose. The roof still needed mending. There were still people who chose judgment over kindness. but Dawson stayed. And Talia kept her name, her work, and the future she had earned. Sometimes a second chance does not arrive with a grand promise. Sometimes it comes quietly, through a hand held across a table, a shoulder offered during a storm, or one person choosing to stand beside you when walking away would be easier. What helps you believe that a wounded heart can find its way home again? Share it in the comments. And if stories of frontier courage, mystery, healing, and enduring love mean something to you, subscribe and join us for the next journey waiting beyond the horizon.